Well, it's a pleasure to be invited to address you here this morning. And Reasons to Believe is an organization my wife and I founded 27 years ago. And it's based on my experience as an evangelist that it's much easier to engage skeptics on something that was discovered just days ago. So we use the emerging scientific discoveries as a bridge to the traditional evidences for the Christian faith. And literally every day, at least 10 papers are published that give us stronger evidence for the Christian faith. And so we make available something called Today's New Reason to Believe. These are articles that you can get for free off of our website that equip you to share with people about the latest scientific evidences for the God of the Bible. And we also produce podcasts where we literally jump on these discoveries within hours after they're announced. And so you can get both of these, of course, through your computer, or now you can get it through a smartphone. Don't even need a computer. And what you'll see in your bulletin is this little card here. And this is designed to help you start a conversation with someone that does not yet have a relationship with Jesus Christ. So please take advantage of that. And there's also a little thing at the back that you can rip off and fill out. And if you do that, we'd love to give you a free copy of a CD called An Astronomer's Quest, which tells in much more detail than I'll be able to share this morning my story of how my astronomy brought me to faith in Jesus Christ. Those are available at the table outside, so please take that as you leave. Now, I was raised and educated in British Columbia, a place where I got really close to the mountains. I still enjoy mountaineering in British Columbia. But Christians are hard to find in Canada. I didn't meet one until I was 27 years of age. However, I did meet some stars and galaxies starting when I was 7, as you heard in my introduction. And starting at age 7, I became very fascinated by what I saw in the heavens above. And it was that study that persuaded me at age 8 to really pursue a career in astrophysics. So from the age of 8 onwards, I knew that I would become an astrophysicist. And what I did was every year I would study a different subdiscipline of astronomy. So I remember when I was 9 studying the physics of the stellar interiors and stellar atmospheres and going into different disciplines. And it was at age 16 that I spent a year studying cosmology. Now, cosmology is the discipline that studies the origin, structure, and history of the universe. Now, this is back in the 1960s, and at that time there was a debate amongst astronomers. Is the universe unchanging, the steady-state theory of Fred Hoyle? Is it an oscillating universe, akin to what you see in Hinduism and Buddhism, the idea that there's many beginnings to the universe? Is it a hesitating universe? Is it a Big Bang? Well, even back then, the evidence was heavily favoring Big Bang cosmology. And I knew if it was Big Bang, that the universe must have a beginning. And if it has a beginning, there must be a beginner. So from the age of 16 onwards, I was persuaded that there had to be a God to explain where the universe came from. And I began to go through the different holy books, religions of the world, to see if any of them could possibly be a communication to humanity from the one that created the universe. Now, I'll tell you this. I began with the idea that all these holy books were humanly crafted frauds. And so I went through the books looking for errors, mistakes, and contradictions. Because I said, if that's the case, then it's simply from a human source. Because the God that created the universe is a God that's completely consistent. And I would expect to be harmony and complete freedom from contradiction and error. Now, I began with the Hindu Vedas. And I found in the Hindu Vedas that it taught that we live in a reincarnating universe with multiple beginnings and endings, with 4.32 billion years between one beginning of the universe and the next beginning of the universe. Well, even back in the 1960s, we knew the 4.32 billion was wrong. We also knew that the universe had an entropy measure that was 100 million times too high to permit any possible restart of the universe. So I put Hinduism aside. And the high school I was attending in Vancouver, the dominant religion was atheism and agnosticism, but after that it was Buddhism. So my Buddhist friend said, you got to check out our stuff. Well, I did, and discovered that in terms of cosmology, they taught the same thing as the Hindus. And so I put that aside. And we had several students of the Islamic faith, and so I began to go through the Quran. And in going through the Quran, I saw this common denominator, that these holy books typically are written in poetry, highly esoteric, very repetitious, with not a lot of content. And there's especially this appeal to intellectual snobbery, that if you're one of the great enlightened ones, you'll understand the meaning of this text, otherwise you're out of luck. And I said, that doesn't look like the God I see behind the universe. As I went through the Quran, I found 3 accounts of creation, but I noted they were different. They contradicted one another. And one of them, for example, said that the stars were closer to us than the planets. And even with the naked eye, you can tell that that can't possibly be true. And I also figured out it had to be written by a man, because it said that the gestation period for the human female was only 6 months. So I then ran into a student at our public school who was of the Baha'i faith. And what he told me was, we in Baha'i take the kernels of truth from all the world religions and put them together into a consistent package. So I says, great, show me what you got. And a week later, I went back to them and showed him all the places where the Baha'i had taken the great mistakes of the world's religions. And he wound up leaving the Baha'i faith. Now, when I told you earlier, I didn't meet Christians till I was 27 years of age, I meant to get close enough to a Christian to actually have some kind of spiritual conversation. That didn't happen until I arrived on the Caltech campus to begin my postdoctoral research. But I did get to see 2 Christians from 30 feet away when I was 11 years old. And these were 2 businessmen that came into our public school, put 2 boxes on our teacher's desk, and left without saying a single word. But in those boxes were Gideon Bibles. And we're all invited to come forward and take one if we wanted one. And we all did. And I still carry that Gideon Bible around with me that I got at age 11. The cover is gone. That's because our dog chewed it up. But it's a treasure. But I didn't read it until I was 17. It literally stayed on my bookshelf, untouched, unread, for 6 years. And in hindsight, I think it's good that I waited those 6 years, because the Gideons gave me a foreign language edition that we call the King James translation. And that would have been a barrier at age 11. But one of the benefits of a Canadian public school education is from grade 7 forward, you get exposed to 2 of William Shakespeare's plays every single year. So by age 17, I was fluent in King James English. And as I picked up this book, I immediately saw how different it was. It wasn't vague, it wasn't esoteric, it was clear and direct. And unlike the other holy books, it would give you names, dates, places, and was very specific about history, geography, and science. And I knew this is a book that I could test to a very deep level. It was also the only book I ever picked up amongst the religions of the world that commanded objective testing. Here's one example from the words of the Apostle Paul: test everything, hold on to the good. What I found in the other holy books was an appeal to blind faith. What I found in the Bible was the opposite. Don't believe until you first put it to the test. Everything must be tested. What also impressed me was the Bible not only commanded objective testing, it showed me step by step how to put everything to the test. Now, I was taught the scientific method in grade 1. Grade 2, I got it every single year. But none of our public school teachers ever told us where the scientific method came from. It wasn't until I picked up this book that I discovered the origin of the scientific method. Wherever the Bible speaks about a sequence of physical events, it follows this scientific method. I prefer to call it the biblical testing method, because that's exactly where it came from. It also explained to me something that bothered me about history, that the scientific revolution exploded out of Reformation Europe. But picking this up, it all made sense. During the Reformation, common people began to read the Bible for themselves. and those of a scientific bent discovered this biblical testing method, applied it to their scientific research, and that was the birth of the scientific revolution. So the Bible explains how to put everything to the test, what I prefer to call the biblical testing method. Now, like most unbelievers who pick up the Bible, they start with page 1. And what I've discovered since becoming a Christian is that many skeptics never get to the New Testament because they get stopped at Genesis 1. But for me, Genesis 1 was the beginning of the revelation that this book indeed comes from the one that created the universe. Why? Because unlike a number of skeptics today, I followed the biblical testing method. And so what you notice in Genesis 1, it starts off, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And I went through the whole Old Testament, and I discovered not once do you see the word universe, but instead you see this phrase, the heavens and the earth, 9 times, always referring to the totality of physical reality, all matter, energy, all space and time. And the word create means to bring into existence something brand new that never existed before. And as I read on into the New Testament, Hebrews 11:3, the universe that we can detect did not come from that which we can detect. Well, what can we detect? Matter, energy, space, and time. I also noted the Bible was the only holy book that said the beginning of the universe is the beginning of space and time. In the other holy books, they speak about God or gods or cosmic forces creating within space and time that eternally exist. But in the Bible, space and time are not eternal. They don't exist until God creates the universe. 2 Timothy 1:9, the grace of God that we now experience was put into effect before the beginning of time. Well, the 1960s was also that era when British physicists were developing the first of the space-time theorems. In fact, I've got that first space-time theorem right here with me if you care to look at it. It's fascinating reading. The singularities of gravitational collapse in cosmology. This is the paper that launched Stephen Hawking to worldwide fame. And that theorem stated that if the universe contains mass, and if general relativity reliably describes movements of bodies in the universe, then there must be a causal agent beyond space and time that creates this universe of matter, energy, space, and time. And at that time, 1970s, physicists recognized that this was pointing directly to the God of the Bible. And the atheists amongst the physicists and astronomers said, we got to find some loophole. And they literally spent 20 years trying to find some way to escape the implications of the space-time theorems. But the end result was they wound up publishing a far more powerful space-time theorem, this one by Arvind Borde, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, inflationary space-times are incomplete in past directions. Don't ask me where they get these titles. But it ends with this statement. Any universe that expands on average must have a beginning where a causal agent outside space and time creates space, time, matter, and energy. And only a universe that expands throughout its history can possibly support life. So all of you are living proof that we live in a universe that must have been created by an agent beyond space and time. And it's the God of the Bible that fits that description. The non-biblical religions contradict that. Well, when you move on into Genesis 1:2, this is where skeptics will comment about the gap. Because there's a huge gap of time between the creation of the universe and the formation of the earth. And they can't understand why Genesis is silent about most of the history of the universe. Well, Genesis is silent. But unlike the other holy books or religions of the world, the Bible is not limited to 1 or 2 accounts of creation. There are more than 24 accounts of creation in the Old and New Testament. And Genesis is not the oldest book in the Bible. That credit goes to the book of Job. And Job addresses what God was doing between creating the universe and forming the earth. He was stretching out the heavens, continuously expanding the universe. And what caught my attention as a 17-year-old is the Bible was the only book the only book that spoke about the expansion of the universe until the 20th century. No book of science, philosophy, or theology outside of the Bible even hinted that we live in a continuously expanding universe until Albert Einstein came along with his theory of relativity back in 1917. Today we can prove that we live in a continuously expanding universe. I wrote a book on that, The Creator and the Cosmos. But I'll show you this morning is a visual demonstration that we must be living in a continuously expanding universe as the Bible uniquely claimed for thousands of years. What you see in the left is a Hubble Space Telescope image where we're looking at galaxies 12 billion light years away, which means it took the light 12 billion years to reach our telescope. So we're seeing the universe as it was 12 billion years ago. Notice at that time, the galaxies are jammed so tightly together, they're tearing spiral arms off one another. But we move forward 10 billion years, and now the galaxies are spread so far apart from the continual expansion universe that this phenomenon no longer takes place. Now, when skeptics declare that Genesis 1 teaches nothing but scientific nonsense, it's because they fail to recognize that the frame of reference, the point of view, changes from Genesis 1:1 to Genesis 1:2. It was Galileo who said at his court trial, the biggest mistake you can make in Bible interpretation is to fail to correctly identify the point of view. Genesis 1:2, God was hovering over the surface of the waters of planet Earth. The frame of reference for the 6 creation days is not God looking down on the earth, but rather God from the surface of the earth looking up at the clouds. And that makes an enormous difference in terms of how we read the account of the 6 creation days. That's step 1 of the biblical testing method. Don't interpret until you establish the point of view. Step 2 is don't interpret until you notice the initial conditions. And Genesis 1:2 gives you 4 for the 6 creation days. Then initially, it was dark on the surface of the waters. The water covered the entire surface of the earth. The earth was empty of life and unfit for life, formless and void. Now, I had an advantage in that I realized as a young astronomy student, all planets begin with opaque atmospheres. So of course it's dark on the surface of the waters. And God creating the universe, matter, energy, space, and time, light would have flooded the heavens, but it would have been dark on the surface of the waters. And what do we see in creation day 1? The text says, let there be light. It doesn't say that God created the light or made the light. He did that before the 6 days. But it was on creation day 1 where God transformed the atmosphere from opaque to translucent so that light could pass through and life could possibly be created in the oceans. God brooding over the surface of the waters, bringing to life the waters. Translucent means that light can come through, but it's permanently overcast. You can't see the objects beyond the clouds. Now, this is implied in Genesis 1, but there are 3 accounts in the Bible that also address the 6 creation days. Job 38 and 39, Psalm 104, and Proverbs 8. And as you go through Job in particular, it tells us in the context of the events before the 6 days, God speaks and says, I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness. So here God is explicit in saying it's dark on the surface of the waters, not because of the lack of light, but because God had blanketed the primordial earth with this opaque atmosphere. Our sister planet Venus still has an opaque atmosphere. What happened with planet Earth is that we lost 99% of the original atmosphere. We also lost 99.9% of our water. Now, when I was studying this at age 17, astronomers really didn't have any idea how this transformation took place. They knew it must have been something really exotic because we don't see it anywhere else in the universe. But today we understand exactly how Earth's atmosphere was transformed from opaque to translucent. It was a planet twice the size of Mars, sharing the same orbit of planet Earth, and how Jupiter and Saturn destabilized the smaller of the 2 bodies and caused the object twice the size of Mars to slowly creep along the orbit of the Earth and make a low-velocity collision into the very deep ocean of the primordial Earth. That event caused almost all the water in the atmosphere to be dissipated to outer space. Also enriched the interior of the Earth so that today planet Earth has 16,000 times as much uranium as any other Earth-type planet that we see in the universe. And that uranium was crucial for building the continental landmasses on Creation Day 3. Now, this is all described in our video, Journey Toward Creation. This is a documentary we produced a few years back where I take you on a journey from the surface of the Earth to the very far reaches of the universe, where we go to different observatories, etc. By the way, it's now in 11 languages. It's been broadcast into Iran and China and Russia, and on 5 different networks here in North America. It's available outside if you care to see the details of this amazing event that caused the Earth to be transformed and led to the formation of the moon, which is crucial to stabilize the tilt of our rotation axis. What you'll also see in the DVD, it paved the way to the events of Creation Day 2. Creation Day 2, let there be water above and water below. Water in the ocean below and water in the atmosphere above. One sentence, but you get an entire chapter in the book of Job. In Job 37, you got a whole chapter that details what God did on Creation Day 2. And what you see in Job 37 is God not only established a water cycle, but he set it up in such a way that the continental land masses received 3 different kinds of frozen precipitation and 3 different kinds of liquid precipitation. This is what you need to have abundant life on the continental land masses. What we now understand is that this amazing collision event has not only gave way to where we have a translucent atmosphere, but set up the ideal water cycle. And I give you a calculation in this DVD of the probability of that happening without divine miraculous intervention. A probability that's less than 1 chance in a trillion. So when you look up at the moon, you're seeing a miracle. When you look at the atmosphere and the rain that comes down, the snow and the hail, you're looking at a miracle. And then we move into Creation Day 3. And it says, let there be land masses. And I had the privilege of studying at the University of British Columbia at age 18 and taking classes from geophysicists, the 3 geophysicists that were responsible for inventing and launching plate tectonics theory. And, when I read the textbooks at age 17, they were all saying the continents have always been with us. But as I took those courses, I realized that according to plate tectonics, the Earth started off indeed as a water world that got transformed. What happens is that the basalts at the bottom of the ocean floor chemically react with what's called class 6 liquid water, which leads to the formation of silicates. Silicates are lighter than the basalts, and they float up above the basalts, and over time you get the continental land masses. Today the theory is so well worked out that we can calculate in detail the growth of the continental land masses. And this is what it looks like. Indeed, it confirms that Earth starts off with water over the whole surface, then you get tiny volcanic islands, and with the conversion of basalts into silicates, the continental land masses gradually begin to appear. But what I want you to notice from this graph is that period of time when you get the most aggressive growth of continental land masses. A little bit more than halfway back in the history of the Earth. Okay, go to Genesis 1. 6 creation days. Where does the text put the growth of the continental land masses? The beginning of Creation Day 3. So notice that these latest scientific determinations are consistent with what the Bible has taught for thousands of years. And then we move into the latter part of Creation Day 3. And what the text is pointing out here is that once the continental land masses are in place, God steps in and fills them with plants. Now, several years ago, I debated Michael Shermer of the Skeptic Society. In fact, I've had 2 debates with him where this subject came up. And he ridiculed Genesis 1 by saying the fossil record tells us that the animals come first and the plants come later on the continental land masses. And your book, the Bible, has it the other way around, saying the plants come first. Well, I had 2 responses to Michael. Number one, the animals have got to eat. So obviously you got to have plants there before the animals. And number two, we would anticipate that it's going to be far more challenging to find ancient plant fossils because plants don't have bones. And so it's going to be far more difficult for the fossils to be preserved. So my response to Michael was, wait and see. It's just a matter of time before scientists find these difficult to discover fossils of the continental early plant life. Well, we didn't have to wait long. Literally a few months after the last of those debates, this paper was published in Nature, where these two authors said, we don't have fossil evidence for the continental plants, but we do have isotope evidence, 3 different isotopes that tell us that the plants were just as abundant on the continental land masses for 200 million years before the Cambrian explosion of animal species as they were for the 200 million years thereafter. And just last year, another paper got published in Nature where they actually found the fossils of the first plants on the continental land masses, showing that these plants were abundant for at least 600 million years before the Cambrian explosion. And so thanks to this research, the Bible has been fully vindicated in scientific detail about its claims. Creation Day 4. The text says, let there be the great lights. Doesn't say that God created the great lights or made the great lights. It says, let the great lights be. And this is the time when the atmosphere gets transformed from translucent to transparent. We're looking at a completely overcast sky, but the sky now breaks where occasionally it is transparent, and for the first time, creatures on the surface of the earth can actually see the sun, moon, and stars that are responsible for the light. Now, today we understand how that happened. It was the great oxygenation events, where the oxygen content began to build up enough that it chemically transformed the atmosphere so it became, at least on occasion, transparent. But what caught my attention at age 17 is that the text actually explained why this event took place. Let there be the great lights appearing in the expanse so that they may serve as signs to mark seasons, days, and years. And recognize that all the life described before creation day 4 doesn't need to know where the sun, moon, and stars are in the sky. Plants and bacteria really don't care. But all the life mentioned after creation day 4 is sufficiently complex that they must have access to the position of the sun, moon, and stars in the sky in order to reproduce at the right time of the year, to migrate at the right time of the year, and reproduce, migrate, hibernate at the right time of the year. And so as we move into creation day 5, it tells us that the seas began to swarm with small sea creatures. Let the seas produce these swarms of small sea creatures. This, I believe, is a reference to the Cambrian explosion event, when suddenly we see this vast profusion of animals of all different types showing up, and they show up simultaneously 543 million years ago. But what caught my attention as an astronomer and physicist, they show up immediately once the oxygen content in the atmosphere reaches the minimum level whereby these creatures could survive. The evolutionary models would predict that there would be a time gap between the first moment that the conditions become possible for these creatures and when they actually appear. But they show up immediately. The other thing we notice is all forms of animal life show up immediately. Over 50 phyla of life show up simultaneously. Today on planet Earth, we only have 30 phyla of life. More than 20 have disappeared. Classic case of evolution going the wrong way. We had more in the past than we do today. And the most advanced of the phyla, the one that we're a member of, the chordate phyla, was fully present at the very base of the Cambrian explosion. So we've actually found vertebrate fossils right at the base of the Cambrian explosion. And the text moves on and talks about God creating birds and sea mammals, but uses a different word for these animals, nephesh, referring to soulish animals. How God is creating life that's not only physical, but physical and soulish, and that God endows these animals with mind, will, and emotions so that they can relate to one another, nurture their young, and they can serve and please a higher species, namely human beings, something that's brought up in more detail in the book of Job. But what caught my attention is only for the second time do you see the word create. There's something about these creatures that is brand new that never existed before, a reference to their soulish qualities. And just like God created these animals with a desire to serve and please a higher species, likewise he creates us human beings with that same desire to serve and please a higher being, namely God himself. And as we move into creation day 6, it doesn't talk about God creating land mammals generically. Instead, it speaks about God creating 3 specialized classes of land mammals, those that are going to be most important for launching human civilization. Again, a theme that's developed in more detail in the book of Job. And mentions 3 kinds: the short-legged land mammals, and then 2 different kinds of long-legged land mammals, those that are easy to tame, contrasted with those that are difficult to tame. Now, why do we need these rodents? Well, they have small body sizes and they're warm-blooded. The only way they can keep their body temperature up is to grow thick, luxuriant fur. And so early humanity used these animals as a source for clothing. They're the ideal clothing animal. Today, we don't need them for clothing purposes, but they form a vital role in medicine. Now, evolutionists will say that we're most closely related to the apes. And that would be true in terms of our internal organs. I mean, the kidneys and the heart and the liver. But what we're now discovering is that we do not share a DNA similarity with the apes when it comes to the chemical pathways that govern brain memory function. But we are identical to the mice and the rats. And it's like God knew that mice and rats would be far better laboratory animals than would be the great apes when it came to developing a cure for Alzheimer's and dementia. So at Thanksgiving, we thank God for the mice and the rats. And, well, Thanksgiving at our household is different. We also thank God for the sulfate-reducing bacteria. And then creation, day 6, ends with God creating human beings. And for only the 3rd time do we see the word create, where God creates one and only one species that, like him, is body, soul, and spirit. We're the only species that is endowed with the spiritual capabilities of asking philosophical questions. Why am I here? What's going to happen after I die? Is there a God? And has implanted within us a desire to reach out to God and serve and please him. So just like the birds and mammals were designed to serve and please us, we were designed to serve and please God. Now, what I noted in going through Genesis 1 is that each of the creation days is bracketed by an evening and a morning. And I thought I would find such a phrase for the 7th day, but it's not there. There is no evening and morning for the 7th day, which told me at age 17, this day must still be existing because it hasn't been closed out yet. And as I read the last creation text, Revelation 21 and 22, I realized an 8th day is coming when God would create again. But during the 7th day, God stops his creation activity and focuses on eliminating evil and suffering once and for all. And having read that, it answered for me an enigma that had bothered me ever since I was 9 years of age. The fossil record enigma. And what is that enigma? When you get before humanity, we see an average of 1 new species showing up on planet Earth every year. But after the appearance of humanity, it drops down to a virtual 0. And Genesis answered that enigma. Of course we see it in the past. God's creating the 6 creation days. We don't see it now because God's at rest. It also answered another enigma for me. Why is it that the vast majority of scientists say we see no evidence for God's handiwork in the record of nature? It's because the vast majority of scientists do their research on day 7. I'm an astronomer, but there's only 10,000 research astronomers in the world. And we astronomers are always getting our data from the past. Our data comes from the 6 days. And that explains why the majority of astronomers believe in God and an afterlife. But there's 3 million research biologists. They heavily outnumber us. and almost all of them target day 7. That's when God's at rest. And of course, they will declare, we see no evidence for the handiwork of God. They're looking on the wrong creation day. Well, when you get to the bottom of Genesis 1, what you realize is, here in the book of Scripture, we get an identity with the book of nature. The Bible gets a perfect score of 4 for 4 in the initial conditions and 10 for 10 on the description and the order of the events of creation. The best I found outside of the Bible was the innumerable list of the Babylonians, which got a score of 2 out of 14 right. The rest of them scored 0, but only the Bible got a perfect score. So that was the beginning of my recognition that the Bible had predictive power, the power to accurately predict future historical events and future scientific discoveries. And so as I went through the Bible over a 2-year period, I found 200 places where the Bible had accurately predicted future scientific discoveries. And I actually calculated at age 19 the probability that the Bible authors could come up with all these predictions without any errors, without being divinely inspired. That probability was less than 1 chance in 10 to the 300th power. And as a young physics student, I realized I just demonstrated that this book is 10 to the 200 times more reliable than our laws of physics. And since I'm trusting my life to the reliability of the laws of physics, it would be irrational for me not to put far more confidence and trust in the message of this book. Now, what I love about the Gideons, they have 2 pages in the back of every one of their Bibles that tells you exactly what you need to do when you become convinced that this is the error-free, inspired Word of God. They tell you, first of all, that you're not perfect, and that God has put a law on our heart that demands perfect performance, but how God sent the creator of the universe, Jesus Christ, to planet Earth, to make a trade through his death on the cross to offer to every human being to trade his moral perfection for a moral imperfection. The other thing I liked about the Gideons is they made it clear that the one that created the universe knows better than I do what's best for my life. And therefore, at age 19, I signed my name in the back of the Gideon Bible, receiving that offer of trading my moral imperfection for his moral perfection, and to make him the boss of my life and have him rule and direct my life. And I've never regretted that decision. And let me just close with this comment. If God cared and supernaturally intervened so much in preparing Earth and its life for human beings, then how much more must he care and supernaturally intervene in the life of every human being? Thank you.